Hey everyone, it's Jillian and welcome back to my channel. Today we will be creating this Christmas wishes cards using products from Gina K Designs and Simon Says Stamp. Here I've cut a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card panel, and I will be using the Master Layouts 1 die set by Gina K Designs to cut out my front panel. Now that the front panel has been cut, I will be using Gina K's Masking Magic to cut one panel measuring 3/8 of an inch and a second panel measuring 1 1/2 inch, as we will be ink blending only a portion of the front of our card. The colors we will be using to ink blend the front of our card is Gina K Designs Medium Orchid, Wild Lilac, and Blue Lagoon. I will be using blending brushes to apply ink to the front panel of my card. Now, when I start ink blending, you will notice some areas will be a little bit splotchy, but the one thing that I love about Gina's ink is they have a smoothing agent in them. So as the panel dries, it will definitely start to smooth out, creating more of an airbrush look, which I absolutely love because it helps smooth out areas that might not look perfect at the time. So I had a little bit of lifting here in the corner. I should have cut my Masking Magic a little bit longer and I wouldn't have had that issue. I tend to have a heavier hand when I'm ink blending, but a quick fix in this instance was just to bend the Masking Magic over the card panel to the back side, so that way I wasn't catching the bristles and allowing the bristles to lift the Masking Magic up. After ink blending with Blue Lagoon, I went ahead and switched to Wild Lilac. I love blending the Wild Lilac into the Blue Lagoon. By doing so, it creates this really pretty, beautiful navy blue color. So after we're done blending the Blue Lagoon and the Wild Lilac, we're going to go ahead and introduce the third color, which is Medium Orchid. It is a newer color in Gina's line, and it's absolutely beautiful and blends really well with Wild Lilac and Blue Lagoon. So I'm going to go ahead and play some music while I finish up the ink blending. After I've completed my ink blending, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my background text stamp from Simon Says Stamp called Friendship Text Background. It is a red rubber stamp, so I'm going to go ahead and use my MISTI by taking out the foam insert and stamping with Gina K Designs Soft Stone ink. Because I'm using a small ink cube, I will stamp my background a couple of times to make sure I get a really good impression. Here I'll go ahead and use my stamping tool that was homemade. I know there's quite a few mom and pop shops who have now added them to their store so you can pick them up, and they do make a difference when using your MISTI tool. So now that I'm done stamping our background, I'll go ahead and remove it from the MISTI. And I'll go ahead and remove the Masking Magic from my panel. I love the Masking Magic because it never rips my paper. Because this card is a holiday card, I will be using the Simon Says Stamp Snowflake Season stamp set to stamp the snowflakes to the front of my panel. I will be heat embossing my snowflakes, so I do want to make sure that my ink has completely dried. It is dye ink, so it does dry fairly quickly, but again, you still want to make sure the ink is completely dry, otherwise the embossing powder will stick to the panel even after using your anti-static powder tool. So I'm starting with the largest snowflake, adding it to the center of my ink blended background. My goal is to keep most of the snowflakes in the ink blended portion, only allowing small areas to hang over into the white space. I love that the stamp set comes with different size snowflakes to kind of fill in the gaps. I don't want really large gaps, but I also don't want the snowflakes to be too close together. Because my card panel is not in the corner of the MISTI, I went ahead and added a little piece of low tack tape to my panel so that way it doesn't shift when I apply Versamark ink to my snowflakes. Versamark ink is a clear sticky ink, and sometimes it will lift your panel, and because I'm going to be stamping it a couple of times, I wanted to make sure that the panel does not shift and I'm stamping in the exact same spot as the original. So before applying the Versamark ink, you did notice I used my anti-static powder tool. You want to make sure that you're using that to make sure there's no static on your panel before you use your Versamark ink. That way the embossing powder only sticks to the sticky areas. So now I will add black heat embossing powder to the front of my panel, making sure to cover all of the stamped images. Off screen, I did preheat my heat tool. I like to preheat my heat tool because I notice I get less warping of the cardstock when the tool is nice and hot. I also notice I don't burn my embossing powder like I used to because I was waiting for the tool to heat up while trying to emboss at the same time. So by preheating the tool, not only does the cardstock warp less, but I also don't burn my embossing powder. So now that the embossing is done, I'm going to go ahead and cut out my layering panel out of Gina K's Black Onyx cardstock. When I cut out the panel, I do like to flip it over and use my bone folder to smooth out the beveled edge. So here I'm using my Connect glue and a fine tip applicator bottle to adhere the two panels together. Gina K's Connect glue is by far my most favorite glue that I have come across. So now we're going to go ahead and start creating our sentiment using Gina K Designs soft stone cardstock as the shadow layer of our sentiment. So the sentiment I will be using comes from the Simon Says Stamp and Gina K Designs Stamp Timber Sparkling Season Stamp Set. Unfortunately, it's no longer available, but you could use any sentiment, any holiday sentiment from your stash that you may already have. So now we're going to go ahead and stamp our grading using the anti-static powder tool. We're going to put that down first before applying our Versamark and then our embossing powder. So before adding my embossing powder, I do use scrap paper to put underneath my tub. I tend to spill my embossing powder no matter how careful I am, so that helps me funnel the embossing powder back into my little container. Again, we'll go ahead and preheat our heat tool so that way we don't warp our cardstock as much. As soon as we're done embossing, we'll go ahead and use the coordinating die to cut out our sentiment. I will use low tack tape to go ahead and make sure that the die does not shift when taking it to my die cutting machine. Using the same die, I went ahead and cut 3 additional pieces and adhered them together. That's going to allow for our sentiment to have some dimension. Again, I'll be using my Connect glue as it is a very strong adhesive, liquid adhesive. A little does go a long way. I hardly ever squeeze my bottle. Really, the only time I do squeeze my bottle is if I'm starting to get low and need to refill it, but a little does go a long way. So now that our sentiment is adhered together, I'll go ahead and set it aside and put a clear block on top. We're going to go ahead and work on our card base. Again, using Gina K Designs soft stone cardstock, we're going to create a panel that measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and it is a top folding card base. So now that we have our card base, we'll go ahead and use our Connect glue to adhere our front panel. I did notice I still had ink on my fingertips from ink blending, so I will use a paper towel to go ahead and press down on the front panel. That way I'm not transferring any inky prints in the white areas. So now it's time to adhere our sentiment to the front of the card. I will go ahead and place it down and kind of wiggle it around to see exactly where I want it. I went ahead and used liquid adhesive so that way I can move it around and make sure it's straight. I'll use my T ruler to line it up. So off camera, I went ahead and laid out a few white pearls to the center of my snowflakes. Now I will use my Connect glue to adhere them down to the center of the snowflakes. And that will complete today's card. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and I can't wait to see what you create. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!